At the very far end of Subnautica's map, you'll find the Sea Treader's Path, an area where giant sea treaders roam the ocean floor. And these creatures are entirely peaceful, which is strange, since the game always makes it seem like the further away you get from your life pod, the more terrifying the environment becomes. But only after spending some time here do you begin to realize just how eerie this place really is. A strange sense of uneasiness begins falling over you, and you feel like something within the game is designed to scare you here, but nothing ever does. A similar feeling has once gone unexplained before. To understand what I mean, I want us to look at the story of how Odysseus, a person from Greek mythology, managed to sail his ship around sirens. For those unaware, sirens are mythological creatures which sing seductive songs to lure in any sailors that hear it. In order to guide his crew around those sirens and safely return to his homeland, Odysseus ordered his crew to stuff their ears with wax so that they wouldn't be affected by the sound of the sirens' song. Yet he himself wanted to experience it. Thus he asked his men to tie him to the mast of the ship, forbidding them from releasing him regardless of his pleas. In the end, the crew safely made it around. But that's only the conventional version of the story. Another version, known as the Silence of the Sirens, tells the story in quite a different manner. First, Odysseus is the one who stuffs wax into his ears rather than his men. Second, for some reason, the sirens don't actually sing their songs. And third, it is the sirens who become fascinated by Odysseus rather than vice versa. There's two interpretations of this version's story. It could be that the sirens simply saw the look of bliss on Odysseus' face and completely forgot how to sing their song. But I'm leaning more towards the other interpretation, the one where the sirens took measure of Odysseus' crew and determined that their silence would be a more potent weapon than their song. The implication is that if Odysseus had not stuffed up his ears with wax and had thus heard the sound of the sirens' deathly silence, he and his crew would have been doomed. But what does this mean? Why should their silence be more powerful than their singing? Well, to find the answer, I want us to return to the Sea Treader's Path. Notice how both this area, as well as the story I just told, invert our expectations. Odysseus expected the sirens to sing their song, as much as we expected the Sea Treader's Path to be inherently terrifying. Yet, none of those expectations ended up being the truth. And, well, because we've associated the feeling of being scared to certain situations, we can't help but feel that way as soon as a situation even somewhat resembles our previous association of fear, even if nothing scary will happen. Yet the problem with that conclusion is that we aren't actually able to associate any previous type of fear with eerie places like the Sea Treader's Path, since it's not actually coming from the environment, it's coming from us. In fact, a French mathematician from the 1600s named Blaise Pascal discovered this exact sensation centuries ago. You might know Pascal for his work in geometry or inventing an early version of the calculator. He was a man obsessed with logic, numbers, and how the physical world operated. However, this eventually led Pascal to notice something incredibly simple, but also deeply unsettling about human nature. In his work of literature, Pensée, he wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Pascal believed in a concept called divertissement, which translates to diversion or distraction. He argued that human beings are fundamentally terrified of the silence of their own existence, and that when we're left completely alone with no apparent task, we are forced to confront our own thoughts. And that by, well, diverting or distracting ourselves, we avoid having to confront those exact thoughts. In real life, this can be used to partially explain why people might prefer to scroll on their phone instead of just waiting around and doing nothing. And, well, if we relate this back to Subnautica, since the Sea Treader's Path is also entirely optional, as you don't actually need to go there to complete the main game, that eerie feeling we get also stems from us having no reason to even be there. What's interesting about that is that another area in Subnautica, the dunes, also doesn't actually give you a reason to go there. Yet, because this biome is filled to the brim with terrifying Reaper Leviathans, they create an immediate threat as soon as you set foot in there, making you now feel fear instead of eeriness. Though, if eerie places like the Sea Treader's Path don't really give us any objective, while also not scaring us directly, shouldn't that just make them feel peaceful? There's actually an ancient Roman anecdote recorded by the philosopher Cicero that explores a similar feeling. It's called the Sword of Damocles. Damocles was a courtier who constantly praised his king, Dionysius, telling him how incredibly lucky and peaceful his life of luxury must be. Dionysius, wanting to teach him a lesson, offered to switch places with him for a day. Since Damocles couldn't just let that chance slip by, he eagerly agreed, and now, sitting on the golden throne, surrounded by incredible food and wealth, he thought his earlier conclusion was correct. This life was indeed very peaceful, and it continued to be perfect, up until he looked up. Because dangling directly above his head was a razor-sharp sword held in place by a single hair of a horse's tail. All of a sudden, the piece he so sought entirely vanished, because his entire existence became focused on waiting for that hair to snap. We often think of this story as a warning about the burdens of power, but it also serves as a good explanation for how our brains work after being exposed to constant stress. When you spend enough time navigating environments where everything is trying to get you, you essentially get used to the sword hanging over your head. So when you finally get a moment of peace, it's difficult for you to actually enjoy it. This is a psychological phenomenon that horror developers have understood for decades. Take the Resident Evil franchise, for example. Scattered throughout the games are safe rooms. These are designated zones where enemies cannot enter, and exist in order to give you a moment to breathe. But there's something about these rooms that's weirdly unsettling. The music here is relaxing and soothing compared to the terrifying atmosphere you're used to. The longer you sit here, the more it feels like your anxiety starts to build, because you know you eventually have to leave. However, what's especially fascinating is that some players feel the exact opposite and are entirely at peace here. And I think this divide exists because memorable horror games aren't just trying to target one type of fear. Instead, they make every player have a completely different experience of it. Which brings us back one last time to the Sea Treader's Path. Imagine coming across this location much earlier in your playthrough. Chances are it wouldn't have scared you all that much, since at that stage your brain wouldn't yet be conditioned to recognize which areas of the game are meant to terrify you. And, well, because of this, you might naturally fall into the trap of assuming the rest of the game is just as peaceful. Though, as most know, this isn't actually the case. So when you eventually stumble into a biome like the dunes, instead of ever feeling eeriness, you're experiencing a much more shocking version of fear. Since this time around, you aren't expecting fear and in turn are met with nothingness, but rather vice versa. And all of this because of a slightly different choice you could have made earlier in the game. The great thing about those experiences is that they don't really have a proper explanation, which just makes every player's playthrough that much more unique. Because in the end, that eerie feeling, as well as many other types of fear, aren't only determined by the game. It's also influenced by your own choices, as well as your own mental state.